Okay, so let's get right into this. For context, I'm a petite, soft-spoken 19-year-old girl and was taking summer classes at community college this summer. One of the classes I had to take was public speaking, which met on every Tuesday and Thursday. This guy, who I still don't even know his name, was immediately one of those kids. You know, angry young man who makes no effort in school and blasts Limp Bizkit as loud as he can. And yes, he really did do this. To get to our classroom that was on the second floor, you had to go down a hallway, down a stairwell to the first floor, out through the main lobby, and through the sliding doors. I noticed at one point he had started waiting for me after class and following me all the way down this route to my car. It didn't matter if I pretended to be on the phone, had both earbuds in, kept my head way down, or literally even power walked away from him. He would just wait there for me and always follow me and try to walk with me, even if I would give him bare minimum responses. The whole time he would be talking to me and attempting to ask me questions. Lots of stuff like asking about each of the cars I drove to school, since my family had to share them all. Even after I subtly dropped that I had a boyfriend, he still didn't stop. At this point, he definitely knew which car would be mine. After a while of this happening, I got a very bad feeling suddenly, and told the class professor what this kid had been doing. She immediately took it seriously, thankfully. She notified campus security, and told me to always stay extra after class, so she could walk to my car with me. True to form, as soon as she started doing this, the guy stopped showing up to class altogether, for at least 2 or so weeks. I thought it would be fine and the crisis was now averted. And it was, until one day he showed up to class again. As soon as I saw him enter the room, my heart dropped. During the class, I slipped a note to my professor, telling her he was the kid in the blue shirt. She told me to stick around after class that day. I did, and so did the guy and another female student. Before he tried to talk to the professor about why he should pass the class despite never even showing up or doing any work, the professor asked me and the other girl to step outside and wait in the hall. Even from all the way out there, though, we could hear him screaming and yelling so aggressively at the professor. He eventually did leave and came out into the hallway we were waiting in. He simply pointed at me and said, "You wait for me." Mind you, I still had no idea who this kid even was. I instantly got the heebie-jeebies and rushed back into the room to tell the professor, who was now equally creeped out. Having overheard this entire thing, the other female student came back into the room 10 minutes later. She told me and the professor that the guy was waiting just outside of the view of the hallway, standing there waiting for me. The professor called campus security multiple times and phoned the front desk as well, but she received no response. This meant we'd have to take things into our own hands. We came up with a plan to all leave the classroom together, pretending to be in very deep conversation with each other. We'd walk past the guy without even looking at him and walk down the stairwell to the main lobby. I could feel his eyes boring into us as we passed him by, and when we entered the stairwell, he stood up and followed behind us. The professor and I exchanged looks of terror but kept our cool act up, stopping at the main desk in the lobby and pretending to converse with the secretary. The guy passed us by, still staring at us, and walked out the sliding doors until he was out of our field of vision. We then had to go track down campus security ourselves and tell them everything that had happened. My professor was furious. After we saw security camera footage of him lurking around still, she contacted local police. She and I both had a very, very strong gut feeling this kid was not right, and we would not be safe around him. That public speaking class was from 3 to 5 p.m. I also had another class though from 6 to 8. I would occasionally drive to Wawa or something in that hour-long gap. However, there was no way in hell I was going anywhere now. I knew the guy was waiting for me to do so. For the better part of an hour, we, me, my professor, security, and the secretary, all tried to figure out just who the hell this guy was. None of us knew his name, because he literally would never come to class. There weren't photo IDs next to the class roster either. Half the original class had eventually stopped showing up, so it's not like we could just use process of elimination. All we had was security camera footage of him. I was escorted to and from my next class and to my car at the end of the night. The security officer asked me to point out my car. When I did, he said, "Oh wow, so he was parked right next to you?" Confused, I asked what he meant. He told me he had been watching more security footage, and the guy got into the car parked right next to me and waited there for a long time before he eventually left. The thing is, I knew for a fact I had not parked next to anyone when I arrived to the school. The lot was practically empty since it was summertime. After finally getting home that night, I was the only person home for a few weeks, go figure. Local police did drive-bys of my home all night and a well check as well. When I returned to the school 2 days later for my Thursday classes, I was informed of some very chilling information. The footage showed him waiting for me in his car on Tuesday after our shared class, which I had already been told, but it also showed him coming back to the parking lot at 8 p.m., just when my last class got out, and sitting in his car right next to mine. Mind you, I had never told him about my schedule or any other classes I could possibly be taking. This whole time, my public speaking professor was filing reports, making complaints against the school for their incompetency, and even got a lawyer. She felt so uneasy about this kid that if he showed up again, she would just walk out. I was in contact with the president of the entire college, the director of security, police, etc. for days. They told me he was banned from campus now, and everyone was on watch for him. If he was spotted, he would be immediately asked to leave. Until the director of campus security, a middle-aged man, called me and told me he had identified the kid and talked to him as well. He told me the guy had said, and I quote, "I just wanted to be your friend." He told me whatever I was doing with the guy, literally running away from him every time, probably made him think I was flirting with him. My professors were absolutely furious and excused me from physically attending class for the rest of the semester. I'm still on edge all the time now, knowing that this guy knows what cars I drive and for all I know could have even followed me home without me knowing. I still don't even know his name, and I hope I will never have to learn it. This happened a couple of years ago, when I was a senior in high school living in Southern California. It was later in the evening, sometime between 8 or 8:30, I believe. My mom and I had just gotten home from a long day of driving and visiting family to discover that our cat was now completely out of food. I was tired of being in the car by then, and I didn't really want to go to Petco to get the cat food, but my mom begged me to go with her. Finally, after a bunch of convincing, I caved in and said yes. Looking back now though, I'm extremely grateful that I went, because if I hadn't decided to go with her, I think there's a good chance my mom would have never come home that night. An important detail that I want to mention first is that the windows on the car my mom had were extremely tinted, making it pretty much impossible to see inside. We pull into the parking lot of Petco and I look around. I notice there's only a few other cars there, with one parked a few rows to the back of us. My mom said to wait in the car since she was going in real quick to pick up the food. A minute after my mom walked away and was about halfway to the store, the car that was parked a few rows back pulled into the spot right next to ours on the passenger side. Of course, I thought this was a little bit strange, but maybe the person just wanted a closer spot to the store. I then saw a man step out of the car, grab his big German Shepherd out of the back, and walk into the store as well. As I glanced over inside the store, I noticed this guy was now watching my mom and following her around. Not enough for her to notice though. He got ahead of her in line, and after he checked out, he stood right outside the entrance, waiting for her to check out as well. When my mom walked out of the store, the guy began to walk silently behind her. At this point, I was getting a very bad feeling. I was very creeped out as well. When my mom made it back to our car finally, she opened the back to put the cat food in. The guy opened the back of his car right next to ours and started talking to her and motioning for her to come look at something in the back of his car. My mom, being completely oblivious, took a few steps towards him and was now looking into the back. His hands started to move towards his waist, and I immediately started yelling for her to get into our car right now. The man was super alarmed. I'm guessing he'd never seen me in the car because of the tinted windows. He stopped talking to her right away. My mom looked extremely confused, but after I yelled at her some more to get in, she finally did. The creepy guy took another double take at our car and immediately hopped into his and drove off in a hurry. When my mom hopped into the car as well, I asked her what that guy was saying to her. She told me he was telling her to look at something he got for his dog that was in the back of his car. I told her everything I observed and that I was pretty sure he was trying to abduct her from the parking lot. It was quite a startling and eye-opening experience for her. I lived in Japan for around 10 months a couple of years back as part of a study abroad program as my placement year for university. I lived in Hiroshima, and pretty much every Japanese person I met was exactly how you would expect them to be. Very generous, very respectful as well. All of them except this one old lady who just so happened to live in the apartment right next to mine. It was about a month after I'd been in Japan. I'm originally from Northern Ireland, so it was quite an adjustment for me to make. When our group of gaijins decided we were going to go to the Saijo Sake Festival. For those who don't know, this is a huge sake, rice wine, drinking festival that from what I now understand everyone goes and gets extremely smashed at. As men of fine taste and culture, we sampled many different kinds of sake from all over Japan and got rode off beyond belief. We all filed onto the train home back to our apartments. I can't remember shit all apart from calling my girlfriend at the time and passing out on my futon. Normal stuff, really. Skip to 6 a.m. the next morning, though, when my loud as fuck doorbell woke me up. Keep in mind my apartment was extremely small, so the noise reverberated loudly. I checked the time and was confused as all get out, but I assumed it was just my friend from downstairs who wanted to talk about last night or something. I looked through the peephole in my door only to see a police officer standing right there. First thought that goes through my mind is, Taylor, what the fuck have you done when you were drunk last night? At the same time though, I was so sure I'd just fallen asleep right away. I talked to the dude using a translation app. He basically told me there'd been a noise complaint. Strange, considering the fact that all I did was make a single phone call and fall asleep. Anyway, the guy saw how confused I was and kinda saw there must have been a mistake. He left without much trouble. Honestly, I was still a bit drunk and super confused, but the day carried on from then as normal. Next morning, 6 a.m., the doorbell rings once more. I kind of assumed already what it was gonna be this time. What do I see through the peephole when I look? Now there are 2 officers. The same convo went down and I convinced them there really was no noise. I literally walked them through my apartment to show them how I'd fallen asleep watching Netflix. They told me at this point it was the neighbor, who I'd never met before, making all these complaints. At this point I really thought she was just a bitch or maybe a bit of a racist. I asked the guy at my uni who takes care of all the foreign students about this. He told me I was getting moved to a room on the floor below. I was honestly pretty pissed because I just settled into my new place. But whatever, this kind of stuff happens, you know. He planned on coming tomorrow morning with the landlord to move my shit out and check that my new room was okay. Has it ever happened to you when you suddenly get woken up by something in the middle of the night and it really fucks you up? I went to sleep at a good time that night to prepare for the people helping move my stuff out early, so naturally at 3 a.m. I was fast asleep, when suddenly my doorbell began constantly ringing like crazy. It was absolutely deafening, and of course it woke me up straight away. I can't even begin to tell you how scared I was of this sudden noise. I couldn't even move. I didn't know what to do. After about a minute of what felt like incessant noise, there was complete silence suddenly. I made my way over to the front door to look through the peephole. I saw nothing, but I just knew it was that psycho bitch of a neighbor. Nothing else happened that night, thankfully, and eventually I did manage to get back to sleep. I woke up the next morning still kinda shaken up. It's cool though, my boys are coming around soon. I kept walking out the front to check if they're downstairs and quickly closing the door behind me because I didn't know what this woman would try if she saw me. I walked into my room and slid the door to my balcony open. This is where I see her for the first time. She had literally wrapped her body around the fence that separated our balconies while keeping her footing on her side. She was just standing there, staring right at me. We stared at each other for a second before she quickly whipped back around to the other side like something straight out of The Grudge. Literally 2 seconds later, my doorbell started ringing furiously. I was thinking to myself, that's not possible. This is some demon shit right here. I am so fucked. Thank God it turned out to be the people helping to move my stuff instead. I told them what was going on and hastily moved downstairs to my new room. She still shows up outside of my new room every once in a while. Thankfully though, I was mostly able to avoid interaction with her directly from then on out. I guess eventually, after all the false complaints, the police decided to start ignoring her calls as well. This past New Year's Eve, I went away for the night with my 2 best friends and one of their moms as well. I was home for the holidays from college, and my friend Sarah invited me to go to Palm Springs to celebrate New Year's with her mom and our friend Rachel. I didn't really have any other plans, so I decided it would be a good idea to go with them. We went to a really cool city about an hour from where we all live, that was very big on shopping and resorts as well. We planned to have a pretty calm night all in all. Watch the ball drop at a block party thing downtown, have a few drinks at the bar. Since we were on the West Coast, the ball drop was at 9 or so. This meant that about 8, we ventured out from our hotel, walking to the block party that was only about a mile away. On the way there, we passed by a very lively bar. We decided to stop by real quick. We spent about 15 minutes dancing, but didn't really get any drinks. It was a gay bar, and Sarah and Rachel being gay, they were pretty stoked on finding this place. They wanted to come back after the ball drop, even though it was about 90% men there. We continued on to the block party, got some dinner, grabbed a glass of champagne. The ball dropped and they had a DJ as well, so we spent about an hour there dancing with everyone. After we got pretty tired of this, we decided to head back to the bar and hang out there until about midnight or so. Once we got there, Sarah's mom paid for a drink for each of us, but left soon after that because she was really tired. It was about 10:30 at this point. Sarah, Rachel, and I are all enjoying our drinks and having a lot of fun dancing. Rachel then tried some of mine since it was one she had never had before. I constantly have my guard up drinking in public, and I felt safe at this bar because it was 90% gay men as well, who I thought would have no interest in me. I went back to the bar to get a second drink, and that's the very last thing I remember. The rest I've gathered from Sarah and Rachel. Almost immediately after grabbing that second drink, I asked Rachel to go to the bathroom with me because I was not feeling well at all, even though I had been completely fine just 10 minutes before this. Once in the bathroom, I collapsed on the floor and became almost unresponsive. Rachel was now extremely worried and somehow dragged my half-lifeless body out to where Sarah was waiting for us. Security, upon seeing my condition, assumed I was wasted and asked us to leave immediately. Sarah and Rachel decided to take me back to the hotel about a half-mile away. By this point, I was completely unconscious though, and there were barely any sounds escaping from my mouth. They saw someone leave the bar at the same time as us and began walking near all three of us, but they were too preoccupied with trying to keep my dead-weight, lifeless body off the ground. At one point, I even vomited all over everything, both of them, the sidewalk, etc. The next part of the story we had to get from Sarah, and Rachel doesn't have memory of this either. Still struggling to carry me, the man they saw leave the bar approached them. He was hitting on Rachel, trying to get her to go grab a drink with him. She was very agitated and told him to leave. Her friend needed help right now, obviously. He would not take no for an answer and followed us down the street. A middle-aged woman witnessed this and came up and told the man off, something along the lines of "Stop harassing these young women or I'll call the police." He basically ran away after that. Next, by some miracle, an EMT and his wife enjoying the holiday ran into us as well. He checked me out to make sure something wasn't majorly wrong, and then carried me the rest of the way to my hotel and into the room. My friends could barely even hold up my weight. They thanked the man profusely, and him and his wife left. This is where Rachel's memory suddenly kicks back in. Only 5 minutes later, they got a knock on the door. It's the EMT and his wife again. They'd come by to let us know that a man had followed us into the hotel. They'd just seen him hop over the gate and start making his way directly to our room. My friends called hotel security, but they were unable to find the guy in the end. My friends didn't get a good glimpse of him, but I'm 100% sure it was that same man from earlier. I spent the rest of the night vomiting everything in my body and dry heaving after that. I woke up the next morning in a pile of pillows and blankets on the bathroom floor. My very last memory was at the bar getting that second drink. My friends filled me in on everything that had happened. Feeling like crap, I thought I must have just drank way too much, but I had never blacked out before in my life, and the amount of drinks I'd had, 2 in 2 hours, didn't add up to me being completely knocked out like that. We decided my first drink had to have been drugged, and since Rachel had some of it, it affected her as well somewhat, even though she was still fully functional. I'm sure that man that was talking to Rachel and then followed us back was the one who had slipped something into my drink. To this day, I really don't know how that could have even happened though. I got my drink directly from the bar and never even set it down once. My guess was that it was already in the cup when I received it. Thankfully, I had a really good friend and lots of kind strangers protecting me that night, but it still keeps me up at night, thinking what could have happened under different circumstances. So this was back in January of 2018. It took me a few years and a little bit of therapy to even be able to talk about this. I'm okay now though, so I thought I would share this. It's a little bit long, but buckle up. I was part of a study abroad program in Bangkok, which was awesome for the record. Not long after being there, my fellow students and I went out for a night on the town. After a night of a bit of drinking and running amok in Bangkok, we somehow ended up in this back alley illegal strip club. Here's where I think it's important to mention that I'm female, and I was the only female in the group that night. I saw things I will never unsee in the 15 minutes we were there, and it honestly keeps me up at night every once in a while. Let's just say it was pretty blatantly obvious the woman did not want to be there. Very quickly, I also did not want to be there. About 5 minutes into this really misguided decision, I realized 2 guys from my group were talking to a guy in a red polo shirt. Oh man, there were many guys in red polo shirts scattered throughout the room, and none of them looked very pleasant to be around. One of my friends, let's call him M, came back over to me laughing, pointed back at the red shirt guy, and said, "Hey, he's trying to get me to sell you to him for $10 American. I keep telling him you're worth more, but 10 is the highest he says he'll go." I've never noped out of a situation so fast in my entire life, and everyone went with me. I'm an experienced traveler, so I did take the opportunity to use this as a learning experience for M. I taught him how quickly these situations can go south, and how important it is to be on your guard always in a foreign country. I thought he'd learned his lesson. We'd all gotten out safe, so no harm, no foul. I'll admit though that after that I did become a little more withdrawn from the group. Everyone would go out partying every single night. I went to school, occasionally ate out, and did some daytime shopping at the markets, or maybe hung out in a high-end spa near the hotel. For like $20 to $50 American, you can get pampered like a queen, and a broke college kid, of course, took advantage of that. 2 other girls joined me on my adventures, and we had a pretty great time overall, actually. Before we were scheduled to return back to the States, my other classmates, okay, it was all M, finally convinced me to go out for a night on the town with them to some strip. People were eating scorpions on a stick. Some dumb girl from Australia who had joined our group took a hit of some gas they were selling on the street and vomited everywhere, and people were packed elbow to elbow. There was a lot of rave-style lights and music. Big sensory overload. I figured I was with a group of 20 people from the US and Australia. If there was a time to drink and party in a foreign country, this would be it. So the drinking started, and the partying began. With drinking, of course, eventually comes the need for a restroom as well. I told M I was going to find one, and I would be right back. M chose that moment to be a diva though, starting to hammer back drinks and demanding everyone's attention. I must have been gone 10 minutes tops. I come back and everyone is gone. I got the story later that the Aussies left and the rest of my group had to chase down M when he ran off in a drunken display for attention. I walk over to the entrance of this strip where we all dropped off and sit down on a picnic table near all the cabs to wait for my group. An hour goes by, 2 hours, 2.5 hours goes by. It's almost 1 a.m. now. The street is still packed, but I've seen not one single person from my group. I was starting to get a little bit concerned. I realized I had no idea where we were really. The others had been coming to the strip every night, but this was my first time. Fuck. Okay, experienced traveler time. I didn't have the address to the hotel written down in English or in Thai, and I don't speak Thai either. Luckily, I hadn't had a drink in 2.5 hours, so I was getting pretty sober at this point. I had been there long enough to know that taking a tuk-tuk, those open wheelie cab things, were much cheaper than taking an actual cab. I had not been there long enough though to realize that taking a tuk-tuk at 1 a.m. alone as a female was a very bad idea. I showed the driver my room key to tell him where I needed to go. What a naive child I was. We negotiated a price and I hopped in. He started going the opposite direction from where our cab came in from to drop us off initially. We took a highway to get there, but my tuk-tuk driver was on all residential streets. Then he wandered into an alley. Okay, I was on red alert right now. He stopped. I poised, ready to strike should I need to. Next to me on my left, a garage door rolled up, and a group of men walked out, one of who was holding a blue purse. I stuck around just long enough to see him start walking over and unzipping said purse as he moved. I bolted. I barely managed to shake off the tuk-tuk driver. I just kept putting one foot in front of the other, crying because I couldn't breathe. I thought to myself I was going to die because I could never be bothered to go to a gym. I kept running and running until finally I saw it. The familiarity of home. A 7-Eleven in the middle of this Thai neighborhood. I was hysterical as I sprinted through that door like the Kool-Aid man himself. The cashier started yelling at me to get out in Thai. I was desperately yelling in English that my tuk-tuk driver had just tried to sell me, and I was not going anywhere. We go at it for a minute or two of me begging him to help me, when this tiny little 4-foot elderly Thai woman came up to me with an equally tiny grocery cart full of 2-liter bottles of Pepsi. She took my hand and my room key. She never said a single word to me, not one. She led me outside, hailed a cab, and had a solid 60-second conversation with the driver, then pushed me into the back seat. The scariest part of my entire night, though, was that 15-minute cab ride back to my hotel. I couldn't possibly know if that little Thai woman had just helped me or sold me out to the highest bidder. The cab driver had to stop and ask for directions about 3 minutes from the hotel, so that was probably the moment I knew this was going to affect me mentally for a while. The ride cost me 10 American, and I tipped him $60. You know, for not trying to sell me as a slave.
Growing up in California, I would hear my older brother and his friends talking about these abandoned towns that were scattered throughout the desert. They would always go exploring in abandoned buildings and towns, and when they would tell me their stories, it would always sound so cool. This is why my family wasn't too surprised that as soon as my friends and I could drive, we began doing the exact same thing. For the most part, we would visit places that my brother had told us about, but there were a few occasions where we would see something online and decided to be the first ones to check it out. For the most part, this led to some pretty cool stories to share when we would all hang out on the beach. But there was one occasion that always haunted me and my two buddies, Dylan and Mateo. The three of us had heard of this ghost town that was out in the middle of nowhere in the desert, and we thought it would be a great place to visit for the day and go exploring. And when a weekend came up that all of us were available, we packed our cameras and began our trip. The drive took about 3 hours, and the last hour of it was particularly barren. There were almost no signs of life outside of the occasional gas station and rest areas. Finally, we made it to the town, and immediately you could tell it had been abandoned for years. Most of the houses were single-story homes, with most, if not all, of the windows smashed out, and a lot of them even had their roofs caving in on them. We spent the first hour or so just walking along the road and peeking into the houses from the outside. Most of them were locked, so we didn't want to break in. However, there was one building that caught our eye. At the end of one of the tiny side roads leading off of the town, we noticed there was one house that had tarps covering up broken parts of the roof. Out of curiosity, we approached. It almost looked like someone had turned it into a makeshift home. I think that was when we all got a little freaked out, as we all simultaneously realized that we might not actually be alone in this supposedly abandoned town in the middle of nowhere. Mateo calmed Dylan and me down, and we all collectively figured that maybe someone was squatting there. But the odds of them still living there seemed small, so we slowly approached it to check out what might have been left behind. As I approached the window, I made sure to listen closely for the sound of anyone moving around inside, but from what I could tell, it was vacant. I pressed my face against the glass, and through the fog created every time I exhaled, I could see all of the torn and tattered furniture that sat alongside a heap of trash left behind by whoever had been staying there. I signaled to Dylan and Mateo to come to check it out, but just as they got to the window, I noticed something that told me we had been wrong. Sitting on a small end table beside the couch was a handgun of sorts, and I could tell even from that distance that it was the cleanest thing in the house, meaning someone was inside. That was when we all heard the sound of vehicles approaching. We couldn't tell what kind, but it sounded like dirt bikes or maybe ATVs. Dylan and Mateo turned to see where the sound was coming from, and before I could join them, we all heard a yell come from inside of the house. A man had come around the corner into the room and was standing directly across from the window. His yell caused all of us to jump, and we began running away as fast as we could. We ducked through the yards that connected the abandoned house and did our best to stay out of sight as the sound of vehicles got closer and eventually passed us in the direction of the house where we were running from. We all made it back to the car, which was parked about a half a mile down the road. As we began to turn around, we could hear something that truly terrified us. Those vehicles were back, and it sounded like they were heading our way. Mateo quickly turned the car around, and we headed home as quickly as we could. When I walked inside my house, I was relieved to see my brother so I could tell him what had happened to us. That was when he told us that he had heard of the ghost town we visited, and they never went there because it used to be a known drug den. The police had apparently busted multiple meth labs in those houses over the past decade. A group of friends and I had always wanted to go camping in the Nevada desert, so when we all finally got the opportunity to do so, we all jumped at it. It was a 3-day camping trip, and we made sure that we had more than enough supplies to deal with the extremely hot days and cold evenings. The first night, was indescribable. I mean, they always say that the sky over the desert at night is something of wonder, but I had never seen that many stars in my life. We spent most of the next day walking around. We went on a decent hike that lasted about 2 hours before returning to camp and getting our food going. From that point on, we just read our books and enjoyed some music that we played through a battery-powered speaker that we brought with us. As the sun fell in the sky, we welcomed what we expected to be another beautiful night, but we were sadly mistaken. We all sat beside the fire as we let it get smaller so we could see the stars better. When my friend Francis began to tap me on the shoulder, I asked him what he needed, and instead of telling me, he just pointed off in the distance. Now we were miles away from any civilization, so you can imagine how surprised we were to see what appeared to be another person standing about 20 feet away from our camp, just staring in our direction. We got everyone else's attention, and by the time they were all looking, the figure began to walk closer to us. That's when I decided it might be best to call out to them, so I yelled hello and asked if we could help them with something. They didn't respond at all. They just kept getting closer. At this point, they were right at the edge of our camp and continued to walk through. We all stood up from our seats and kept asking them if they were okay and if they needed help, but there was no answer. They didn't even look at us as we tried to talk to them. It was a grown man who slowly made his way right through the middle of our camp and then continued walking. That night, we decided to stay up because we weren't sure if they would come back or not, but around 2 a.m, the wind began to kick up and our fire ended up being blown out. If it weren't for the stars in the sky, we would have been in total darkness. We spent the next 2 hours waiting for the sun to come up, and after about 20 minutes of darkness, our worst fears came true. We could see the figure that we saw before lurking around in the distance. We all stayed close to each other, still unsure about what he wanted. There were a few occasions where the man got close to our camp, but he just seemed to be aimlessly walking back and forth. It was terrifying, but he oddly didn't seem to want anything to do with us. As the sun began to rise, we all began to pack up our things. Though nothing happened to us, there was no way we could do another night out there. As we were packing our things, I kept looking out into the distance, wondering if I would see the man who had been stalking us, but there was no sign of him anywhere. We left the area without a trace of us being there, and haven't talked about going back since. When I was 27 years old, I decided I wanted to be adventurous, and one of the things that I always wanted to do was go on the Appalachian Trail hike. So I decided to plot out a 4-day section of the hike and ask my dad if he would drop me off at my starting point and pick me up 4 days later at a spot that I designated on the map and GPS. He was more than happy to help me, and before I knew it, my hike began. Days 1 and 2 were just fine. I was making good pace for a while, and it was actually looking like I might reach my pickup point a day early. That would have been fine though, as I would just camp out and take the day to relax and get a good night's sleep. Halfway through my 3rd day, I couldn't help but feel like I was being followed. I assumed it was just some animal and nothing for me to be too concerned with. But after swearing, I heard shuffling behind me. I stopped and looked over my shoulder. That was when I noticed what looked like a bit of fur poking out from behind a tree. As soon as the animal poked his head out to look in my direction, I could clearly see the head of a mountain lion. He noticed me looking at him and took off running off the trail and into the woods. I was confused and concerned, as I never encountered a mountain lion before, and I was essentially in the middle of nowhere. I couldn't stand there for long though, and I decided to keep my pace and continue walking through the trail. Sure enough though, about 5 minutes after I continued walking, I got that feeling again, and I just knew that I was being followed. I decided it might be safer for me to end my trip sooner than later, so I stopped on the trail and quickly pulled out my map. I could feel the two eyes staring at me from beyond the tree somewhere. I just couldn't take the time to find out which one. As soon as I looked at my map, I found the nearest pickup location and called my father. I think he could hear the panic in my voice because he told me to hurry to the parking lot and that he would meet me there. I had a 4-mile run ahead of me, but I did my best to pace myself. I had to take a few small breaks to catch my breath, but as I got closer to my destination, that feeling of being followed slowly faded. By the time I had gotten to the parking lot, I could see my dad's car. I quickly ran to it and explained to him what had happened. We both made our way home and tried to forget about the whole thing, but it's something I still can't quite shake.